We're also terrified of boredom nowadays. But throughout human history, when a child came to a parent and said, I'm bored, that was the child's problem, right? Parent would say, well, too bad, go outside and play or find a friend, or they'd use that eternal expression, use your imagination. Now a child says to a parent, I'm bored, and the parent panics and thinks, oh no, I'm failing as a parent, my kid's bored. Where's the iPad? Maybe we need another extracurricular in the schedule. No, no, what you need to do in that moment is back off, slow down, and let the boredom happen. Because it is in those moments of restlessness, of not knowing what's coming next, of not having a schedule or a test or a target or a timetable. It's in those moments of boredom that children learn how to create, how to invent, how to use their imagination, how to get along with their peers, how to look into themselves.
Hello and welcome to the second episode in the Energize Me podcast. We're delighted to be joined today by Carl Honoré. Carl is an award-winning writer, broadcaster and TED speaker. He's the voice of the global slow movement. I particularly like this quote from Huffington Post, describing him as the unofficial godfather of a growing cultural shift towards slowing down. And I'm joined as well by Gopinder Badwan, our Chief Medical Officer, and I'm Ian Haken. So, Carl, tell us a little bit about how you've got that badge, and what does the global slow movement mean?
Yeah, I love that particular quote because it's got a kind of edginess to it. It's sort of saying, if you don't slow down, you might wake up with a horse's head in your bed, sort of Godfather style. But that's not at all the kind of person I am. Right? I'm more about persuading people than browbeating them into slowing down. The slow movement is, maybe it's easier to start off by saying what it's not. It's not about doing everything slowly, right? I'm not an extremist of slowness. I love speed, right? Faster is often better. I think we all know that, right? But it's not always better, right? It's not always the best option. And that's really what this slow, with a capital S, revolution is about. It's about doing things at the right speed, understanding there are times for fast, there are times for slow. Musicians talk about the tempo giusto, the correct tempo for each piece of music. And that kind of gets at what this slow culture quake is about. It's about doing things, in tortoise mode and hare mode, right? The tortoise and the hare, we've got a bit of both in each of us. And in a way, I think if you drill down deeper into slow, it's really a mindset. It's about quality before quantity. It's about being present and in the moment. It's about doing one thing at a time. If you remember the days when we used to do that, ultimately slow is about doing everything not as fast as possible, but as well as possible. A super simple idea, but an immensely powerful one because it can game change everything you do, right? From the way you eat, to the way you make love, to the way you raise your kids, the way you work, the way you are in the world.
Excellent. Yeah. And I know that you start the book by your original book, In Praise of Slow, with this story talking about family, about the battle at bedtime with your son, about bedtime stories. That was kind of where you started your own personal journey with this stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people have a similar experience. You get stuck in fast forward. Every moment of your day is a race against the clock. And you can't get out of that vortex of speed until you have a wake-up call or a shock to the system. And I think for a lot of people, and I'm sure Gopinder will echo this, that for a lot of people, that wake-up call comes in the form of an illness. One day the body says, I just can't do this speed thing anymore. And you have a burnout or some kind of allergic reaction, or just the body just sends you the bill. My wake-up call came, as you say, when I started reading bedtime stories to my son. In those days, I was just so fast that my version of Snow White had 3 dwarves, right? It was just ridiculous. My son would say, what happened to Grumpy? And it was a pretty lamentable state of affairs. I knew it was, but I just couldn't break out of that roadrunner approach until I had my wake-up call, which was I found myself flirting with buying a book I'd heard about called The 1 Minute Bedtime Story, right? So Snow White in 60 seconds. And I remember thinking when I first heard that, hallelujah, I need that book now, right? Amazon, drone delivery. But then the second reaction comes rolling in, right? And it was very different. It was, whoa, if I really come to this, right? Is this what my life is? Just a constant dash to the finish line, fobbing off my son with a soundbite instead of a story. That was when I guess I hit rock bottom. And that's when I started thinking about slowing down.
And you talked about, and you talk in the book about the different aspects around sort of eating. You talk about all aspects of life, and a lot of things we talk to clients about around their well-being and their energy. You talk about, slowing down your exercise. Interestingly, I'm a sort of Ironman triathlete, done all of these long distance events, and I was for speed. In fact, my TEDx talk is all about trying to get quicker and trying to get to Kona, the Ironman World Championship, which I abandoned during COVID because I realized that I had a similar epiphany that it was just a silly goal that I was overreaching for. But it's interesting because the first time I started working with a professional coach, though, he said to me, in order to get faster in, you need to go slower. Because I was kind of trying to hack running, trying to hack training by, if I've only got half an hour to train, I'm going to just go mad. I'm just going to do high intensity, high this, high that, all fast, which just damages your body and just puts it under too much stress. When you're training for, you're past the end of that U curve of endurance sports where you're training more than you perhaps should. And he actually just got me to really slow down, and that was a big moment for me. And the next year I got the best Ironman time I'd ever got. And
you got your personal best, right?
Yeah.
That's
from going slower.
Yeah. I mean, I think I call that the delicious paradox of slow, because in our roadrunner culture, we tell ourselves that slow is lazy, it's torpid, it's unproductive. You're roadkill, right? If you slow down, that the opposite is true, that by slowing down judiciously at the right moments, you light up everything you do. You're able to move fast when you need to move fast. You're able to recharge, replenish. And every top elite athlete will tell you the same thing, the importance of rest, of slowing down in between those bursts of speed. And from the animal kingdom is a great example, which is the cheetah, right? Which is the fastest moving creature on Earth. But the cheetahs don't do much sprinting. They do a little bit of sprinting. They can out sprint anything on the planet, but they spend, I think is it 22 hours a day just sleeping? Most of the time just kind of lolling about, being slow, right?
Yeah.
So they have that slow moment, that slow recharge time, and that energizes them so that when the fast moment comes, they can smash it, right? They're hitting personal bests every time. So it's that kind of, I think of it as shifting gears, right? That's really what this slow revolution is about, is relearning the lost art of shifting gears. Sometimes you slow things down, and then that allows you, paradoxically, to speed up even more when you need to.
Excellent.
I have a question for you, Carl. So sometimes slowing down can be taken as lack of productivity by some. And I certainly used to feel that way, kind of slowing down, you become less productive. And I guess, shifting gears is about intuition and having that feeling. How can someone kind of find where the right level of, the speed is, the tempo gusto?
I think it's not something you don't download an app, right? Or, buy a book that tells you instantly how to. I think a lot of it is intuition, right? A lot of it is feeling. And in order to get that intuition, you need to build up the kind of your own database of experience and knowledge. So I always, whenever I'm working with clients, I always suggest running little pilot projects, right? So you say, for the next week, I'm going to, if you do it personally, or everyone in the office is, say, going to leave the office when the work is done, rather than staying at their desk for 2 hours longer to look impressive. Or every morning we're going to get up and I'm not going to look at my screens for half an hour. Or at the end of the day, coming home, I'm not going to look at a screen for an hour, right? I'm going to switch off the kind of speed limit, the super highway of information, and switch into a lower gear. And then at the end of the week, you kind of look back and see how it affected your work, your sleep, your energy, your mood, and so on, and tweak after that. So I think one of the ironies of our hurry up culture is that we're so impatient, we want to slow down fast, right? So people do want to think, okay, what's the workshop I can do? What's the app I can download that will allow me to have this instant intuition? And that app doesn't exist, right? It's always a process of learning. It's slowing down can be slow, to get it right so that it becomes automatic and instinctive takes time. But once you get there, you don't look back, right? Because you just think, well, why didn't I tap into this instinct before? But in the short term, I think there are little warning signs we can look out for, or signals that can tell us that it's time to shift out of hare mode into tortoise mode, if you like. Often the body is a really good one, right? So if you're sitting at a desk and maybe your eyes start to feel a bit dry, or your shoulders a little tight, your back's a bit sore. I mean, just a little alarm bell like that can be a sign that, hang on, this might be moment to shift out of whatever this straight down the barrel of the laptop screen is, and getting up and doing some movement, just walking around the office, or going to have a tea, or having a chat, or just stopping, right? Going and doing a bit of breathing in the corner. So the body can be a really useful barometer for that kind of thing. And another one I would just throw in as well is memory, right? There's an intimate bond between slowness and memory. I mean, Milan Kundera, the famous Czech writer, wrote about this, that when things move too fast, nothing sticks. And I think a lot of us have that experience, that when we get stuck in fast forward, that we don't remember anything, right? You get to the end of the week and you look back and think, man, what did I eat 2 nights ago, right? Or I know I finished that Netflix series, but I honestly can't remember how it ended, right? Because you're not really there. And I think if you're feeling that your memory is just dissolving on you, that is not early onset dementia, right? That's just too much speed in your life. So I think memory is a really good yardstick. If you slow down and start doing fewer things and doing them in a way where you're fully present, you're giving all of yourself to that moment, and you're having slow moments and faster moments and mixing them up, you will remember things more. And that's another way to measure whether you're getting into your own sweet spot, your own zone, if you like.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Carl, and thanks for that. It's the power of reflection, isn't it? Like you said, it takes time, and you've got to keep going back and building up that intuition. So yeah, that's really fascinating.
I can personally really relate to that, Carl. I listen to. I've got an Audible account, and so all your books are queued up. I listen to that one. I'm on the current one, Boulder, at the moment. Right. I'm about 2 chapters in, but that preparing for this interview and listening to that book really caught me at a moment as things are starting to change for me. And I lost both my parents this year. My mum to Alzheimer's, and my dad to Parkinson's, so both suffering from memory loss. And I've had a sort of 23andMe test years ago, and I've got the Alzheimer's gene, and that's kind of made me a bit, and if you'd met my mother, you'd see that I'm a carbon copy of her and all of her sisters and her mother. I've definitely got the genes from them. But as I listened to your book, and that really spoke to me about where I am right now and how I live my life, I have slowed down a bit. I've made Fridays. Fridays were already quite a loose day for me, but I've made Fridays. You can't see because with the benefit of the Zoom call, but I'm in my tracksuit bottoms because I've made Fridays my casual day. I've made Fridays my day when I do a little bit less. Or take some time out to spend time with my wife. And I just tried to cram less in during the week. I've still got all the same things going on I had before, but I just took a more relaxed, steadier view of them. And I would almost certainly say that my memory has got sharper in the last 3-4 weeks as a result of doing that, and made me less fret about, am I becoming my mother, and am I, going to get this god awful illness that sadly we lost her to. So yeah, it's really that really resonated what you just said with me right now.
I think a lot of people have gone through more of that than maybe ever before because of the pandemic, right? Because what COVID did was impose a global workshop in slowness, right, on all of us. And I am not a fan of the pandemic at all. I mean, not surprisingly, maybe so many people wrote to me at the start and said, "Oh, you must be so happy, right? Everything's slowed down." And I thought, at no point have I ever been happy about this pandemic. It's a total nightmare, right? In so many ways. But, there are always silver linings. And I do think it's been a surprising moment of reset and reboot and reflection, right? Because a lot of people, suddenly we were pulled out of a world where FOMO was the default setting because simply there was nothing to do. You couldn't go out. So we were forced to stay home and to look inward instead of outward, to stop. I think part of the whole fast forward world is that we have become human doings instead of human beings, right?
Yeah.
And I think what the pandemic did was that it nudged us back towards just being in the moment, being at home, doing simple things like puzzles or baking bread or talking to our children or our partners or going for walks in the neighborhood. Really simple stuff, really simple, slow things that I think people chafed against a little bit at first, but then warmed to. And as we're coming out, or I hope we're coming out of the pandemic now, this is something you're finding across the world, all cultures, across all socioeconomic levels, people coming out and saying, you know what I had before just wasn't adding up for me. You know, that constant rush, that itch to do more and more, cram stuff in at every second. I'm going to come back to life again now, but the new normal, you know, the phrase we all use now, is going to look different. It's going to be slower, right? I'm going to do fewer things. I'm going to, instead of accepting, I don't know, 3 social engagements in a week, I'll do 1 or 2, right? And people really demanding different ways of working or changing careers. A lot of people moving to places that have slower rhythms. Look at the way cities across Europe, particularly, reshape the urban landscape by tearing up car roads and installing bike paths. You know, so a lot of things happened that moved the dial on slow quite a bit further, thanks to the pandemic.
Yeah, certainly. We touched off air about the geography of where we all live, and I've certainly seen that there's been a draw from where you live in London to places like where I live in Norfolk, as people realise that they're slightly slower pace, whereas pre-pandemic Norfolk was perhaps seen as a bit of a backwater and a bit of a sort of a dead end place to go at the end of your career, or possibly somewhere nice to raise your children, but not much more than that. You know, not a career aspiration. But I think people are realising that actually, that slower pace of life is something I want more of.
Just 100 yards from where I'm sitting right now, there's a bustling shopping street called Northcote Road, where people come in, you know, shops, bars, everything, you know, really humming place. During the pandemic, the local borough decided to shut the street down, close it off to traffic all weekend. So suddenly, a road that was tyrannized by cars and buses, and where people didn't really engage with each other because they were crammed into pavements, you know, trying not to get run over as they cross, now is completely transformed 2 days a week. And it's just, you go out there now and it's just like a medieval village fete, right? There's small children running around, people skateboarding, tables from restaurants spilling out into the street. And that's so, you know, we're in this enormous volcanic metropolis that is London, but even here, people are finding ways to carve out spaces and moments and ways of being that are slow. So these things won't go away. People have tasted that deliciously sweet fruit of slow. They're not going to let it go, right? They're going to want more and more.
No. I was going to ask you about that actually, because obviously I got the whole pandemic thing down. You've just covered that off. But I was going to ask you about the period between writing your first book, which I think got published in 2005, and presumably you were researching that a year or two before that, and the immediate period up to the pandemic, and how the slow movement had progressed in that time, given world events and things that had happened in that time, and particularly the onset of technology, and how, you know, you were talking about email and not really talking about social media and things like that then, because they hadn't really gripped by then, had they? I think Facebook probably
they're just starting,
just started out. But you know, there's far more demands on our time now, or had up to the big before the pandemic kind of made us all sit back and reflect a bit. Maybe where did you see the slow movement going in that time?
Well, the slow movement before the pandemic had been growing, you know, ironically very fast, right? I mean, it had been spreading across all fields of human endeavor. I mean, there was a massive slow fashion movement, right? You know, which that was one of the areas of human activity where I thought, gosh, that is going to be a tough nut to crack, right? Because just fashion just feels so much about here today, gone tomorrow, and you know, moving things quickly and so on. And yet there's a huge push within the fashion world and there's slow travel. And even in the high tech sector, the gaming, there's a whole slow gaming movement, right? To creating games that are more immersive, and some games where you make one move a day and so on. So even in areas that you would think would be just by their very nature inimical to slow, have also embraced slow, that there are slow movements in there. But at the same time, I would say that the dominant current of culture remained acceleration. And so we had this big crank forward in speed, as you say, with social media. I think that added a whole extra layer. And it's interesting because you said there's so many demands on our time, and that's true. But I would add that there are so many temptations as well, right? The two things come hand in hand. So a lot of these things that we find ourselves cramming into every little nook and cranny of our diaries, we feel pressured to do them because, you know, the boss is demanding it or a client is on our back. But a lot of them, we're putting those things in ourselves, right? You know, we're the ones choosing to sit down on a sofa and doom scroll through Instagram for 45 minutes or 2 hours, right? Instead of going for a walk or cooking a meal for our loved ones or reading a book or something, right? So we're making those choices. So I think that's what's fascinating about the way the pressure of the fast culture has maybe morphed a little bit in the last few years, is so much of it is coming from us, right? We're choosing to buy into it. Whereas perhaps before, you could argue before the social media revolution, a lot of that motor of speed was kind of external to us. It was a lot of it was coming from work, right? You know, work emails, all that stuff. We had less control over that. But man, we've got so much control over Netflix. But look at how many hours we're pouring into it, right? You know, and there's no one holding a gun to anyone's head to watch that next episode of, I don't know, whatever, Foundation, you know, but there we are watching it, you know, instead of sleeping.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then we're waking up the next day and not having a fully rested night's sleep, and that's impacting
and not
on
only that,
else.
we're waking up the next day and saying, gosh, I've got no time. And you think, whoa, wait a minute here. Let's just push pause for a second and look how you're using your time. Because anytime you look at a time study, you realize that people are just, it's like a black hole, especially the tech, right? We just allow hour after hour to get sucked down this rabbit hole when it's really on us. I mean, I know it's difficult because these things are devised very cleverly and very slickly to lure us in. I mean, Silicon Valley, these people hired the best brains in psychology and, you know, user interface to keep us hooked, right? They are crack cocaine on a silicon wafer, right? But that doesn't absolve us of responsibility, right? I think a lot of this comes down to each of us to choose how and when we deploy the off button, right?
Yeah.
It is on every gadget, right? It is there somewhere, usually indicated with red, and we can use it.
Yeah, and we get sucked in, don't we, by the shiny lights, the brightness, and I don't mean the physical brightness of what's on, but just the shininess of all. That's really exciting. And you said you used the word FOMO earlier, and obviously we get a dopamine fix every time we press a button on a device, don't we? Every time we get that interaction, every time we get that like, every time we do those things, we get a little hit of dopamine, and that says, oh, this is good, this feels nice. And so we do it all the more. I always say to our clients, you know, control your tech, don't let it control you. It's easier said than done, isn't it? But that is actually the exact very same point I've just actually got in my list of questions. I also want to talk to you about the kind of hyper parenting phrase. Particularly interested in that myself, because as one of the things I do as well, my wife generally leads on it, is we're foster parents. So the children that come into our household are not necessarily, you know, got all the right bits in the right boxes, bless them, because they've been through some sort of trauma or problems in their life. But talk to us a little bit more about this sort of hyper parenting.
Well, before I do that, I just want to salute you for foster parenting, because I think that's an extraordinary,
thank you,
glorious and bold and courageous thing to do. And bravo. Hyperparenting. Well, it seems to me that we have stumbled into a unique moment in the history of childhood, you know, a moment where children's lives have been hijacked by adults in a way we've never seen before in human history, right? Hijacked by our fears and fantasies and our anxieties and agendas. And the evidence is all around us. I mean, a lot of kids come out of the womb now and they just hit the ground running, right? So it'll be, you know, baby Einstein DVDs, baby sign language classes, baby goes pro sports clinics, Mandarin lessons in the Moses basket, and then endless extracurriculars and tutoring and rushing around. And then all this sort of social media time that gets sort of layered on top of that. So that for a lot of kids now, childhood has come to resemble a race to perfection. And of course, that's not every child, it's not every community, and that hyper parenting with a capital H features more prominently in the middle and upper middle classes because a lot of it takes money to fund. But the whole culture itself has moved in that direction. This idea that children, whether it's the cranking up of academic testing, I mean, that's something that all kids are submitted to. There's just this kind of weirdly mechanistic approach to raising children now. It's almost like, I think for a lot of parents, parenting has become a cross between a competitive sport and product development. And for the society, it's become a similar thing. It's become like project management. So it's all metrics and data and a very mechanistic approach to raising kids. It's this idea of, okay, we got this child here now. We're going to spend whatever, every spare minute, every dollar or pound, and invest every sinew of our energy to drag them to where we want them to be at the age of 20, right?
Yeah.
Whereas that's not really that's not what human life is about, right? The counter argument is slow parenting, which is to say, actually, here's my child now born, and then let me take your hand and let's discover who you are, right, along the way, rather than having this mechanistic fixed idea. There's a great cartoon in the New Yorker magazine a little while ago showing a upwardly mobile couple hovering over their newborn in a crib. And the mom is cooing and saying, "Oh, sweet, it's a lawyer." And I kind of think that gets at sort of how we sort of put the cart before the horse in a way, rather than sort of saying, look, back off and let children have the time and the space to explore the world on their own terms, to run reasonable risks, to play freely. Not because a lot of kids, the kind of play they get is adult driven play. There's an adult standing nearby with a clipboard telling them how to play faster and how to play better. They need to get bored, right? I mean, let's fly the flag for boredom here for a moment, right? We're all so terrified of boredom nowadays. But throughout human history, when a child came to a parent and said, "I'm bored," that was the child's problem, right? The parent would say, "Well, too bad, go outside and play or find a friend," or they'd use that eternal expression, "use your imagination." Now a child says to a parent, "I'm bored," and the parent panics and thinks, "Oh no, I'm failing as a parent. My kid's bored. Where's the iPad? Maybe we need another extracurricular in the schedule." No, no. What you need to do in that moment is back off, slow down, and let the boredom happen. Because it is in those moments of restlessness, of not knowing what's coming next, of not having a schedule or a test or a target or a timetable. It's in those moments of boredom that children learn how to create, how to invent, how to use their imagination, how to get along with their peers, how to look into themselves, work out who they are rather than what everyone else wants them to be, how to regulate their emotions. It's the cornerstone of child development. And yet in this faster, busier, always doing something, everything must look productive, everything must appear useful on a CV or a job application or a university application. We don't allow for boredom, right? We just excise it. We eliminate it from the picture. And we're doing children and all of us a great disservice because not adults need boredom too, right? In the workplace, you need to let the mind wander. It's in those moments of simply nothingness, right? The art of doing nothing, letting your mind drift. We know from this, the science tells us that in that moment, the brain shifts into a richer, more nuanced, more creative mode of thought that psychologists actually call slow thinking, right? No surprise there. You ask people when their most creative ideas come to them, no one ever says, when I'm juggling 49 emails or racing to meet a deadline with the boss breathing down my neck. They say my best ideas come in the shower, right? Or walking the dog.
They
come in those slow moments.
Yeah, it's interesting because you touched on a real life example from this morning. Obviously, without going to betraying confidences around the young person we've got with us at the moment, obviously they come from a different place. They're not been hyperparented as a rule. They're quite the opposite. But they're hypervigilant. So the all the stuff you just talked about around kind of boredom is really quite relevant to them. So this morning, little one she's 9. She was she asked me what the time was. She's always asked me what the time is. She's always obsessed with the time. And she worked out from the time that was 35 minutes before my wife was getting in the car to take her to school. And what am I going to do for 35 minutes? What am I going to do? Well, it took 5 minutes of that for her to have a conversation with me about what she's going to do with the 35 minutes. So we were down to 30 minutes. And I pointed out the fact that, she does 10 minutes worth of reading at home a night, and she does 5 minutes on her maths online. So there's 15 minutes worth of stuff there that she could do from tonight to take it away from tonight, but she didn't want to do that. And then she sat at the top of the stairs in disgust, the fact that she'd got nothing to do for 30 minutes because there's no devices in the mornings. And 5 minutes later, I went out there and I thought she's just going to sit at the top of the stairs, just getting everybody's way. 5 minutes later, I went out there. She had found a jewelry making kit and was sat in this mindful experience, lost in making some jewelry, and she'd made a bracelet for my wife. And I thought, she wanted to be occupied in that moment. She wanted to, fill it with it. She was angling to go on the TV or get a device or do something, because what on earth could she do with 30 minutes? And in the end, she sat there till we had to remind her that it was time to get up and get her shoes on and not be late for the school run.
That's a brilliant story. That you pulled a slow parenting power move there, my friend, right? Because I think so many parents now are especially terrified because everybody wants to be their child's best friend. And it's all this, nobody wants to take the unpopularity hit. And if you take that unpopularity hit and say, okay, you're bored, deal with it, right? So maybe for 5 minutes, there's some grumbling and some gristling and maybe some sulking on the stairs. But as you say, these muscles, these play muscles, children are programmed to explore, to discover, to poke, lift, come up with new things, fit stuff together. Those muscles are there. For a lot of kids, they've atrophied because of the childhood they're growing up in. But if someone does exactly what you've did, which is just sort of back off for a bit, those muscles will kick in, and there you had it. That child was enjoying a perfect slow moment right there.
Exactly.
Because you did a slow parenting thing. So nice one.
And I'm guessing, Gopinda, in the surgery, you're seeing this kind of thing coming in with children with, when diagnosis of things like ADHD and things, that those kind of things in that sort of area. There's lots of different badges, as it were, that a child might be diagnosed with. Whether they've got it or not, it's a different thing. But do you see that showing up, Gopinda?
Yeah, so you do get a lot of parents worried that, has my daughter or child or son got ADHD? So they're very hyper all the time on the go, and you kind of have to defragment what the story behind that is. Could it just be parenting itself? Could it be the type of food that they're eating? How they're getting stimulated? So again, it's interesting what Carl and yourself have said with that story, is that you just slow things down with the child. Let them explore, let them do what they do, and take a back seat, rather than pushing on them a personality or a character that you feel they should have. So it's fascinating. And I think it's the same with adults, to be honest. I think sometimes we have so many different faces. We're the same person, but we might be a different face with your neighbor, a different face with a work colleague. We need to slow things down, as it were, just to be who we are, rather than impersonating someone who we think the other person believes that we should be. So yeah, absolutely. Slowing that time down, adding that reflection, just taking a deep breath. I particularly love that example. Good ideas come in the shower, and they so well do. A lot of my thinking is done in the shower in the 5 minutes that I have. And it is just to switch off and just let your mind just think about what is important, take a deep breath, and, move ahead. So kind of, think about need over wants, in my life, what is it that I need today, not necessarily what I want.
That's why I take a bath 10 minutes rather than 5.
Yeah, I'm a big bath person too. At the end of the day, let it all kind of metabolize and digest the day. And yeah,
my wife's a serial bather, but so I'm usually in secondhand water. But there you go, I can handle that. there's always one around at some point during the day. About an hour after she's got out of it is just about boiling point for me.
Right.
She's fried herself in it, and it takes an hour for me to get it to the right temperature. I was going to talk to you about fast eating as well. Or slow eating rather, and slowing it down. My mother was one of 8, and they were quite a poor family, so food was quite scarce. And if there was food on the plate, chances are one of the other 7 would possibly steal it from you. So she kind of grew up and learned to eat really, really fast. And my dad was an only child, so he's got no excuse. But he also eats quite quick as well. He also did eat quite quick as well. So when my brother and I were growing up, we ate really fast, and we still do. And it infuriates my wife, in the fact that we'll sit down for dinner and my plate's been demolished well before anybody else has really even thought about putting a broccoli in their mouth. Have you got any tips and tricks for somebody like me that eats way too quick, and how they might slow? Because I know, because obviously this is what I do. I know that's better for me. I know it's better for my digestive system to slow it down.
Yeah, I feel your pain, because I'm a naturally fast eater as well. I come from a family of fast eaters, and although I have reconnected with my inner tortoise generally in my life, there are two areas where I still always feel the itch to go too fast. One is driving. Haven't had a speeding ticket in over 10 years, right? But I still I can feel the power throbbing beneath the bonnet, and I want, especially when people are overtaking me, I want to go faster. And then at the table, just naturally want to eat fast. So some of the things I do to stop that are, just simple stuff like, every time I take a mouthful, if I feel myself eating too fast, I just make sure I put my cutlery down in between, right? Just simply, it doesn't inject an hour, but it injects a few seconds. And it also creates a pause thoughts right in that moment. I suddenly become more aware. Also, I will start asking myself questions about, I'll be thinking about what's in my mouth, rather like thinking, I'll try to come up with 2 words to describe what I'm experiencing as I'm chewing. And just a little thing like that can just shift you down a gear. And then the next few mouthfuls, you don't necessarily have to carry on coming up with 2 adjectives for every mouthful, but it's just doing it the one time or twice, just will kind of just shift you into lower gear, brings that awareness. And then a third tip, which is a slightly left field one, is that there's a gadget called a slow fork, which I was sent as a French engineer who created this thing. And what it does is it measures how quickly you lift the food to your mouth, and then the number of seconds between mouthfuls. And the default setting is 10 seconds. So if you are going to lift your fork up again too quickly, it vibrates and you get a red light, and you know not to lift it. And then once the 10 seconds elapse, you get a green one. And so I've got one in my kitchen, which I don't use it very often, but every once in a while I will feel myself thinking, you know what, I could just use a little reminder, and I'll bring it out and have it for a meal or 2. And it'll just help me reset again. So so he actually came up with it more as a medical tool to help people combat obesity, because of course, Gurpinder, you'll know all this stuff. The faster you eat, the brain doesn't get the messages. The stomach doesn't have time to send messages to tell the brain it's full and all that stuff. So all kinds of things go wrong. And he created it for medicinal reasons, but it's actually now moved out of that realm into something much more social and cultural, because he realized that a lot of people, just like you and me, feel like we're eating too fast, right? And a little nudge, tech one, not unwelcome. I'm generally against tech at the table. We never have TV or phones totally verboten, but every once in a while I'll bring out this little fork. It's very discreet, right? It doesn't send off a screeching alarm, and only I feel it when it's vibrating. Useful thing to play around with. I'd recommend Googling it if that's something on your radar.
I think I found something to add to my Christmas list.
It goes perfect stocking stuffer or a fast eater. A slow fork.
Excellent, thank you. That's brilliant. Yeah, I'm definitely going to tell my wife about that when we finish.
She'll probably buy it for you.
Yeah, I think she probably will. I don't think she'll wait till Christmas. Excellent.
So you say in your book, slowness is to make time for activities that defy acceleration. So Carl, what kind of things do you do in your daily life that defy acceleration?
Well, daily I do a bit of breathing and meditation, which is very common these days. But my go-to activity for slowing down in that sort of way is sketching, is drawing. I grew up a terrible drawer. I still am terrible at drawing, but there's something about the physical act of taking a pencil, looking at the world. Really looking at it, because when do we ever stop and look thoroughly, deeply, and meaningfully at something? We don't. Our eyes are flitting here and there, where our minds are else. And just to focus on something for a long period of time, something even banal like a window or one of my favorite drawings is one I did when I was sitting in the front row of an EasyJet flight. And it's just the the kind of wall you see there with the, where the flight attendants have all their cake, and I go back and look at that picture. I remember so clearly that moment, which was probably about 7 years ago. And there's something about the act of wielding a pencil, rendering what you see on the page. It's like yoga, right? It's just so soothing. So that's one of my favorite ones, is sketching. My drawings are so bad, I won't show them to you now, and I never show them to anybody. But it's not the final product, it's the process, right? It's the journey and the destination, which is very slow. It's what's important to me with drawing is the journey. It's not the destination. I wish the destination were a little bit more appealing and easy on the eye, but you know what? I'm happy as long as the journey is slowing me down, which it does.
And I think that your drawing example there is a really good metaphor for everything, isn't it? We spend our life trying to race to the destination and trying to get there as quick as possible. We forget to enjoy ourselves along the way. And I think that, for me, encapsulates everything you've been talking about, really. Just take it, as they say, take time to smell the roses. Because I talked earlier about my triathlon journey, that it took COVID for me to realize that I'd lost connection with the very thing that I fell in love with in the first place, which was strapping the dogs to my waist and run and going for a run around the block.
And just doing it. Yeah.
So it was all about, the run was then, this thing that was becoming a difficult thing rather than something I enjoyed, because the run was about, getting a bit quicker at this and going a bit further than that, and et cetera. So yeah, we've really got to take time to enjoy the journey, haven't we?
Yeah. And just spend less time freaking out and obsessing over the metrics, right? I mean, this is part of the problem now. We're such a data-driven society, people wandering around with Fitbits and, iWatches telling them to the very last millisecond, how fast they did this, what their heartbeat was. And, I think that can be useful, but there's always a danger that the thing you're measuring becomes more important than the thing itself, right? The measurement becomes more important than the thing you're measuring. And there's an old quote, I think it's from Einstein, that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And I think it's a useful aphorism to have in your mind when you're thinking about when to use the fitness technology, because it can be super useful. I'm a sports guy, I play a lot of sports, I work out, I know that these things are helpful, right? But I definitely don't wear one constantly, just for that reason. I don't want to feel like it's the tech is measuring me. You started out talking about don't become a slave to the gadgets. I think there can be a risk, not for some people more than others, but I think it's there for all of us, the risk.
I particularly like to measure my sleep with this, which I don't look at religiously, but kind of just gives me a check-in on making sure that I'm in check with my sleep. Like I said, there is a danger that you're obsessing about it, and then you're obsessing about your sleep. You won't sleep because you're obsessing about your sleep, but the gadget can exacerbate that. And if you're that sort of personality,
exactly.
I remember at the beginning of our process, we gave clients a choice of wearing smart gadgets or not wearing smart gadgets. And a client said to me, I don't think I could wear a smart gadget for you, Ian, because I'd just be worried about the results all the time. So it sort of captures that really well, doesn't it? This has been really interesting. I think I've got a couple of sort of final questions that we're going to. You're our first official external guest, but that we're going to ask all of our guests. Our first podcast was just me and Kapinda talking about energy and health. So the first question is around energy, and sort of talking about what you talked about at the slow movement. How does that give you energy?
I think it does in two ways. One, physically gives you energy because, it's the old battery metaphor, right? You just need to recharge your batteries. Mm-hmm. So I'm somebody, I do some kind of competitive sport or workout every day, right? But I also take a lot of time, like the cheetah, right, to rest. I sleep. I never wake up to an alarm. I wake up when I wake up, which is the joy of not having children at home anymore and working for myself. I know everyone can't do that, but so I do a lot of resting. And that just means that when I do need to step up and sprint or run or compete for something, I've got my batteries topped right up. So I think it's that kind of gear shifting metaphor I've been using all the way through, that you have the slow, and that allows the energy to flow full bore when you need it. I think the other dimension there is the emotional, right? So if you're living fully, enjoying things every moment, right? Instead of it being a race against the clock, it becomes a small adventure, right? I just feel like that lifts the spirits. And if you're feeling optimistic and upbeat and hopeful and just enjoying your day, then I think that lends a kind of energy, or it gives an extra edge to the physical energy that you've built up in your batteries. So the two things are going hand in hand, I think.
Excellent.
And slow is the thing that joins them.
Excellent. Yeah. And then, so if, and this is the one that came straight out of my coaching playbook. If I had a magic wand, what would be the one thing that you would change going forward, both personally and so it's a two-part question. The one thing you'd change personally, and the one thing you'd change in society?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, let's start with the second, society. The one thing I would change in society, and let's be clear, there are many things that I would change if I could wave a wand, but the one I would start with is children. I would if I could, I would make sure that every single child had every single opportunity to be the best that they could be, right? So that's going to be everything from food to housing to education to a loving community and family and neighborhood or social network. All of that, I feel that would be the one thing I would want to have, is that every child would have that. What would I change? One thing I would change for myself. That's a good question. I would like to go live somewhere different. Does that qualify? I don't know. I mean, I'm a very international. I speak various languages and I travel a lot for my work and I get to use my languages. But I've been living in London now for 20 odd years, and I love this city. It's wonderful in so many ways. But I feel like I'd like to go somewhere. I mean, I had my first 10 years of my career, I was a foreign correspondent. So, I love that being an outsider and the curiosity that elicits, and you're in a constant questioning mode. And I feel there's something so rich and energizing about that, right? And I feel like London is so familiar to me now. And I think I'd like to, let me put it more, say, I'd like to live somewhere less familiar for a little while. I don't know for how long or when, but that's what I would like, I think. Yeah.
So not necessarily slower, just less familiar.
Yeah, less familiar. No, because I feel like I'm living a slow life in London, and I could do it living in, the Canadian Rockies. Because it's a mindset, right? It's a spirit, and so I've got it now. I can take it anywhere. It's portable. So yeah, no, it wouldn't be about slowing down for me. It would be familiarity. I'd love to be somewhere where the quotidian, the ordinary banal details of the day were surprising to me.
Excellent.
I miss that.
Great answer. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really interesting talking to you today. Anything else you want to add before we finish, Kapinder?
No, I think that was a great answer by Carl. And I think that I would agree with him. Having less familiarity, just get the mind juices, the excitement back in life, the curiosity, definitely. So yeah, I agree.
Thank you for your time, Carl. It's been really good.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure from start to finish. If I could just finish with one quote, which just popped into my head.
Yeah,
it's from
sure.
Mae West, the actress, famous actress. She once said, anything worth doing is worth doing slowly.
Excellent.
So on that note.